So we're very pleased to have with us Anna Lardas. Anna, as I sent out a little biographical information, I think, to the parish. Grew up in Boston and married one of our first parishioners of St. Vladimir Church, who is now Father George Lardas. And so we're really pleased to have her be with us today. She is often asked to speak on marriage and family issues, and I've heard her speak on several occasions, and I think she speaks wonderfully, and so I thought it would be really good for us to have the opportunity to hear her, and it worked out in her schedule, so we're very, very happy to welcome her so much. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to your talk, and also to your talk tomorrow after the Divine Liturgy. Mamshka will speak about being a woman in 21st century America, so I think that will be very interesting as well. So thank you very much for coming.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Father bless. Fathers, parishioners, and visitors, thank you for having me here. Your parish is dear to our hearts, and it is gratifying to see how, every time we visit, the church is bigger and the congregation has grown. Today, my topic is marriage as an image of salvation. There is a lot of talk today about marriage and who may or may not be married. The church's position on this will be easier to understand if we look at marriage in the context of life. The late Bishop Constantine used to gather the youth for the discussions and always asked, what is the meaning of life? He received different answers. But he concluded that the purpose of life is the salvation of our souls. This makes all our other decisions easier, he said, because one has to ask only one question about every planned course of action, which is this or is this not for my salvation? The purpose of marriage is that we will not be alone in this quest for salvation. First and foremost, marriage is to help us be saved. Secondly, it is to establish a firm basis for the raising of Orthodox children and for sheltering and nurturing our friends. Thirdly, a firm marriage is the basis for building a parish, a community, and for transforming society in the way that St. Seraphim counseled when he said, acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 souls around you will be saved. In ancient times, marriage was not limited to one man and one woman. There are many reasons for this, not the least of which being the high mortality rate for women. In Old Testament times, if a man died childless, his brother would marry his wife, and the children they had together would be ascribed to the late brother, so that everyone had a chance of being an ancestor of the Messiah. After Christ was born, everything was transformed. Adam and Eve were liberated from the ancestral curse, slave and owner became alike in dignity, and marriage became the sole provenance of one man and one woman. In this way, they became a model of Christ in the church. Christ is the head of the church, and all of us are, through partaking of Holy Communion, part of the body of Christ. This means that we are his hands and feet and eyes and ear on this earth. In heaven, for example, Christ will wipe all tears from every face. But until then, here on earth, it is we who are charged with finding and comforting the mournful. Christ shows us what to do, tells us what his plans are for us, and, most importantly, loves us, whether or not we get it right. If you look in the concordance, the list in the back of the Bible of all the important words used in the scripture and where they are found, you will see that before St. Paul, all mention of wives were about their rights and duties under the law, whether or not their vows are binding, under what circumstances they may or may not be put away. St. Paul is the first to say that husbands must love their wives. Before Christ, nobody thought to put a thing like that in writing. Of course, there is a corollary to that, namely that wives should obey their husbands, but this should not surprise us. After all, why would a woman not want to obey someone who loves her, who has her best interest in heart, and who wants for her only good things? And how can a man not love a woman who supports him in his goals for his soul, for their life together, and for their family? Marriage removes us from selfishness. By forcing men to marry women and women to marry men, the church draws us from our comfort zone and leads us to encounter different ways of thinking and being. We already know and love our own families. And so by having requirements that spouses be separated by 6 degrees of marriage and 3 of baptism, the church leads us to find new people to love. And by having a man leave his mother and father and start a new life with his wife, the church shows us how to spread the faith, how to make love grow. Marriage shows us our faults. We may not think that we have very many until we have to share food, a bathroom, and blankets with somebody else. And within a marriage, spouses can and should point out faults, but not in public, not in front of the children, and never in a way that will demean. St. John Chrysostom advises husbands, let him admonish her as being less perfect. Let him persuade her with arguments. Let him never once lift his hand. Far forbid this from a noble spirit. No, nor give expression to insults or taunts or revilings. But let him regulate and direct her as being wanting in wisdom. Yet how shall this be done? If she be instructed in the true riches, in the heavenly philosophy, she will make no complaints like these. Let him teach her then that poverty is no evil. Let him teach her, no, not only by what he says, but also what he does. Let him teach her to despise glory. Then his wife will speak of nothing and will desire nothing of the kind. Let him, as if she had an image given into his hands to molds, let him from that very evening, when he first receives her into the bridal chamber, teach her temperance, gentleness, how to live, casting down the love of money, and at once from the onset, and from the very threshold. Let him advise her never to have bits of gold hanging about her ears or down her cheek and laid around her neck, nor laid up around the chamber, nor golden and costly garments stored up. But let her chamber be handsome. Still let not what is handsome degenerate into finery. Adorn thine house, thyself with all possible neatness, so as to breathe an air of soberness rather than perfume. For hence will arise 2 or 3 good results. Then the bride will not be grieved when the apartments are opened and the tissues and golden ornaments and silver vessels are set back to their several owners. Next, the bride getting, well, I'll just skip all that. He says, he tells to wives, never let a wife say to her husband, unmanly coward that thou art, full of sluggishness and dullness and fast asleep. Here is such a one, a low man of low parentage, who runs his risks and makes his voyages and has a good fortune. And his wife wears her jewels and goes out with a pair of milk-white mules. She rides about everywhere. She has a troop of slaves and a swarm of eunuchs. But thou hast cowered down and livest to no purpose. Let not a wife say these things, nor anything like them. For she is the body, not to dictate to the head, but to submit herself and obey. But how, some will say, is she to endure poverty? Where is she to look for consolation? Let her select and put beside her those who are poorer still. Let her again consider how many noble and high-born maidens have not only received nothing from their husbands, but have even given dowries to them, and have spent their all upon them. Let her reflect on the perils which arise from such riches, and she will cling to this quiet life. In short, if she is affectionately disposed toward her husband, she will utter nothing of the sort. No, she will rather choose to have him near her, though gaining nothing, than gaining 10,000 talents of gold, accompanied with that care and anxiety which always arise to wives from those distant voyages. Besides giving alms, marriage supports us in 2 inseparable Christian virtues, prayer and fasting. Pray together. Make the sign of the cross over each other before you part in the morning. Find a time during the day to read the daily epistle and gospel. During the fasts, when one kind of intimacy is discouraged, let your souls grow together by reading spiritual words to each other before bed. Fasting can be hard, especially for men. They're bigger than us and they require more protein. But a clever wife can make fasting a joyous burden. One newlywed told us, my wife makes me a paella on fast days, and anyone who could have such paella will never have trouble keeping the fast. Make a fuss over each other when you come home. Sometimes both husband and wife have to work, but whoever is home first should take time to joyfully greet whoever comes home next. I sometimes forget to make supper during the day. First it was because our children were little and needed attention. Now more often it is because I am writing. So my husband makes a point of calling me before he leaves work or the church. This way I can be sure to put out something before he comes home. He doesn't care if it's fancy zakouski or just hummus smeared on bread, so long as I spread the hummus with him in mind. On fast days I will open a can of cashew halves or mixed nuts. On non-fast days maybe vegetables and ranch dressing. But there will be something on the table to take the edge off his hunger and buy me time to make a proper meal. When we were first married, I asked our parish priest, Father Armand Luciano, what I could do to make my husband happy. I expected spiritual advice of some depth. He said, first, Danushka, make sure to send him out the door with a good breakfast. Then, when he gets home, make sure, do not make him talk right away. Give him 15, 20 minutes to unwind. I know you have been home alone and are eager to have conversation, but this is essential. Many women do not give their husbands time to relax and find that they may stop somewhere along the way for a glass of liquid relaxation. And this can be a disaster in the long run. Wives also need some time alone, especially when their children are young. Considerate husbands who let their wives go for a girls' night out or for a class or lecture are investing in their own happiness. Families should pray together, and if the father insists that everyone go to church and the mother assists by making sure everyone has proper church clothes ready on time, you will forge a salvific habit that will extend from your child's lifetime to your grandchildren and beyond. When our children were very little and our parish was 30 miles from home, I would pack 3 outfits per child and 2 for myself, so that a small disaster did not send us home. The hallmark of Christian life is forgiveness, and forgiving each other is one of the important virtues of husbands and wives. The late Father Seraphim Slobodskoy, who wrote the Law of God that is used both in the diaspora and now in Russia, always told couples coming to be married that they should ask each other's forgiveness every night before bed, and each should frankly forgive the other. But, he said, one should be careful not to specify of what one is repenting, or just exactly what one is forgiving, or a new argument may ensue, and just before bed at that. Modern society spreads the idea that a man who loves you will know exactly what you want, and exactly what you are thinking. Nothing could be further from the truth. Men, my husband tells men and women approaching him for marriage, are clueless. Not only does a man not know what you are thinking, it doesn't even occur to him that you are thinking anything. My father told me, for a woman to be happy in a marriage, she has to be articulate. When I tell my husband the things that I am thinking, it is like having a really competent person help you unpack from camp. You know, we'll frame this award, we'll wash these sneakers, we will throw out those socks, they cannot be saved. And you didn't tell me you played tennis. Likewise, take time to talk to each other. If you can swing date night, that's even better. But if not, when the children are playing in the living room, you can talk in the kitchen. Or when your adult children are not get home from work, you can have tea and cookies together and talk about things, important and trivial. What if you haven't seen a happy marriage? Today, many families are divorced, and this deprives one of the chance to see a husband and wife together, happily facing the daily grind of work, dishes, and children. But it can be learned, or else St. Paul would not have asked St. Titus to urge the older women that they may teach the younger women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. The Church does not ask the impossible of us. What can be taught can be learned. Find happily married people and spend time with them. Read good books where the family has a strong male head. The Anne of Green Gables series is good, as are the Narnia Chronicles. Avoid television shows that denigrate the father, making him a buffoon or worse. Husbands and wives can teach their children to honor their parents by reminding them about upcoming birthdays and name days and planning celebration for each other, by treating each other with respect and making each an authority for the children. I don't know, let's ask your mom. Children will take note of what you do. Provide a sanctuary for like-minded friends. The world hates us and mocks our values and scorns our belief, but the Church crowned you. Your own house is a palace, and it can be a place where others who want to live properly can find comfort and support, love and fellowship. If the Church is the ark of salvation, then Christian marriages can be lifeboats for those tossed on the sea of life. The world judges us for making the purview of heterosexual couples only, but when you love someone, you want what's best for them, and what could be better than salvation? All sin separates us from God. A lifestyle which incorporates acts which the Church has condemned cannot be pleasing to God, no matter how real the love that the individuals have for each other. We discourage and protect each other from the wrong kind of love, from love that is abusive or predatory, from incest, and from rape. And we cannot call a marriage a relationship based on things that the Apostle calls ashamed to speak of openly. Encouraging and sanctioning this behavior cannot bring our friends to salvation. In a statement by our Western Diocese of Rohor in 2004, this was explained better. They wrote, "It is the duty of the Church to direct her children to obedience to the laws of the state when these do not conflict with the law of God. When the law of the state deviates from the ways of righteousness appointed by God, the Church must call attention to the dangers such a departure presents. We are compelled to address our flaws concerning the nature of matrimony, otherwise known as marriage. We must obey God rather than man. Holy matrimony consists of the union of two persons into one through the union of their souls and bodies, through mutual submission and obedience, and most importantly, through the action of God's grace. It is a holy mystery, a sacrament, an avenue of the grace of God given to us not for the indulgence of our passions, but for the working out of our salvation. For this reason, it cannot be merely a social or civil contract entered into by two persons. Marriage is the God-ordained union of a man and woman for the purpose of creating a home, a little church, in which the couple and the children which are their progeny, being the product of the physical affection for one another, are able to work out their salvation. Marriage is a sacrament that is not created by the husband and wife out of their love for one another or by their pledge of loyalty and mutual submission to each other. Marriage is a mystery bestowed by God through the action of the church upon those who are made one thereby. The estate of marriage cannot be established by human action alone. It must be bestowed by God alone. Nor can this or any grace be bestowed by the state, for it is the gift of God, given within the confines of and subject to the discipline of the Holy Mother Church. Although the state chooses to recognize this union as beneficial to the stability of society and so bestows certain benefits under the law through licensure of this action, marriage is not now, nor has it ever been, an action of the state. The sacrament of marriage is a divine action, subject only to the grace and will of God, which is expressed in the unbroken and pure tradition of the Orthodox Church. In addition to the salvation of souls, the husband and wife and of their children, the sacrament of marriage also serves as a guardian and standard of moral behavior. Any lustful action outside of the bounds of sacramental marriage is damaging to the soul and creates a barrier between man and God. The sacrament defines the limits of physical and emotional intimacy between two persons. These limits include, but are not limited to, the fact that marital relationships are only possible between a man and a woman, that the conception, bearing, and raising of children is the natural and desired product of marital relations, and that such relations are only permitted within the sanctified bounds of marriage. Any type of intimacy outside of these boundaries is considered to be sinful and constitutes a barrier to the spiritual life and communion with God. Man is created for the purpose of communion with God. To that end, we are endowed with the image and likeness of God, and any barrier to the fulfillment of that image and likeness runs counter to our created purpose. When we do not act in accordance with God's will, engaging in behavior which is sinful, that is, behavior which prevents the realization of God's image and likeness in us, then we suffer the eternal consequences of those actions. In the modern culture, much emphasis is placed on the culture of the flesh, and the eternal and spiritual nature of man has been minimalized. Self-indulgence has become the primary value and is protected by our modern society under the pretext of individual civil rights. Personal gratification and fulfillment in this world has supplanted the spiritual striving for purity and holiness, which is the true source of joy. The love of God has been replaced by self-love. The desire of eternal bliss has been replaced by the desire for worldly bliss. The fear of eternal punishment has been replaced by the fear of worldly discomfort and condemnation. Man has supplanted God as the measure of all things. It is said by some that there is no difference between the ban that once made interracial marriages illegal and the prohibition now in law allowing against allowing same-sex marriages. We do not accept this as an issue of civil rights or the protection of a minority. The decision by a state to extend the provision of law concerning civil marriage to same-sex unions is irrelevant in God's eyes. Within the Church, the mystery of holy matrimony is not a rite, it is a calling intended by God for a specific purpose, and not merely for the fulfilling of earthly lusts or the comfort of a life shared together. The argument that some same-sex unions is natural, while apparently a powerful argument, ignores the truth that our human nature is fallen and corrupted by death and driven to the satisfaction of the desires of the flesh. The expression of sexual desires without the blessing of the grace of God is not directed to a life that is natural, but is an extension of a death-directed existence. Only by striving to live the life of Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, can we begin to understand and achieve a life which is truly natural. Another argument against same-sex marriages is this. It deprives the children whom the couple adopts from having parents of each gender. Men and women bring something different to marriage and also to parenting. Fathers take the long view, do not worry about diurnal trivia, can convince a mother that a child's misbehavior is not the end of the world. A father is also a strong deterrent when a child is tempted. He can tell himself or his friends, "I can't, my father will kill me." It is a hedge against sin. A mother teaches things a father does not even know he doesn't know. The rules of society, how to match clothes, a child's first prayer, how to treat others. Both a father and a mother teach their sons that strength is good only when it is coupled with compassion, that beauty is at its best when it is covered with modesty. When my daughter was in kindergarten, she brought home a flyer the high school cheerleaders sent out about a day of fun for the girls. They would learn a cheer, wear makeup, and be photographed with the cheerleaders. "Can I go? Can I go, Mommy? It is only $50. I said, "No way." She asked, "Why not?" We have never been a household that says only $50, but there was a larger point I needed to make. "Cheerleaders," I said, "stand on the sidelines and cheer when others do things. I want you to be the person doing things that make others cheer." "Oh," she said, and later went on to run cross country and row crew, while others cheered. Before I conclude, there are some difficulties that arise in this life that we should address. Our lives are meant to be in harmony with God, and that means hearkening unto the cycle of the life of the church, with fasts and feasts and mourning for our sins and rejoicing over forgiveness. Husbands and wives sometimes have to abstain from sexual relations. When this happens, some of the habits you developed as single people will once again be handy. Don't make things harder on each other. The introduction of a little formality, less touching, makes abstaining easier, while being extra kind to each other keeps the marriage fed. This is the time for husbands to make a point of cleaning the snow off their wives' cars, for wives to make a husband's favorite Lenten dish. "If we can't make love," said one man, "we can at least make like." Be nice, but be careful. If you can't go to Cleveland, stay away from the bus. Whether or not it's fair, in our society a woman is often judged by her beauty, her house cleaning, and her cooking, and a man is judged by his ability to provide. The church clearly eschews all this when she asks that men remove their hats before coming to church and that women cover theirs. A man's hat is the distinction of his job, and when you come to church, you're not what you do. You are who you are. And when women all have their heads covered, we all look like we're the same age and part of the same family. Today's society pressures us all to be perfect all the time, which makes it more of a comfort to come to church. Church is the only place of your life where everybody already knows you're a wicked sinner, and they love you anyway, in part because they too are wicked sinners. Come to church and make Orthodox friends across all generations. It is hard for a woman when she cannot cook and clean, and on a man when he loses his job. For the first, we can quote our Savior, "Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but Mary has chosen the good part." For men, it is harder, but God loves us for who we are, not for what we do. When a husband or wife has suffered a blow that threatens their sense of self, it is more important than ever for the other spouse to be loving, patient, and supportive. Wad up your pillow and scream into it when you're alone if you have to, but never cast up to your wife the state of the house when she is ill, or to your husband the privations that come with unemployment or underemployment. Part of Adam's sin was criticizing to God, "The wife you gave me." God gave us the spouses that we need for our salvation. What happens when a marriage is truly on the verge of collapse? Well, one of two things. It gets better or it gets worse. There is no stasis in the spiritual life. Likewise, in marriage, if you are going through a rough time, be extra kind to each other. Pray for each other. Pray for your marriage. And make it clear that divorce is unthinkable. And yet, in our lives, sometimes the unthinkable happens. What are the grounds for divorce in the Orthodox Church? According to the spiritual court for this diocese, they are apostasy from orthodoxy, adultery and unnatural vices, incapacity from marital cohabitation, affliction by leprosy or syphilis, unknown absence, jail sentence with the deprivation of rights, infringement upon the life and health of the other spouse and children, incest or prostitution of spouse, entering into a new marriage, serious incurable mental sickness, or intentional desertion. If you find yourself in these circumstances, talk to your priest. What about those who never marry, or those who marry but never have children? The Messiah has been born. There is no stigma in this. Childless adults are a huge help to overwhelmed parents. They can teach Sunday school and knitting, can take children to the park so their mothers can breathe, can hold the children from a large family who are too young to stand for the whole service, but who have younger siblings who have made claims on the parents' arms. They can provide material support for the things families cannot afford. They can do the tasks that need performing in a parish that would take a parent away from a child. The Orthodox Church has many paths to salvation. We have gifts differing, and God wants us to use all of them for our salvation and for the edification of others. In short, the purpose of a Christian marriage is to prepare us to spend eternity together, united in the love of God. Like mountain climbers built together with a rope, sometimes we climb together, sometimes we spell each other, and sometimes all we can do is hang on and pray. But with God's help and with preparation and effort, a couple can reach the summit together. Thank you.
So we have an opportunity to ask questions and have a little discussion here. So usually what this takes is just one bold person to ask a question, and then everything will flow very, very nicely. So we're looking for that bold, fearless person. Does anyone have a question about what Matushka said?
Maybe it's not about what was said, but extension. So I have a question about women's role and men's role in children's education, grown children.
Okay. Well, I found that within our life, my husband, there's a meme going up on the internet where they have a child being thrown in the air as the child sees it, and he's, up in the air a fair way, as the father sees it, and he's a little bit up in the air, and as the mother sees it, and he's halfway to the moon. and I think fathers can help a child to be bolder, and mothers can make sure the diurnal details get taken care of, A father can have a big, huge plan. He has a longer view of things. My husband has helped me from alienating the children on several occasions. One time I was forcing them to eat something they didn't like. He said, "Annie, why are you doing this? It's making mealtimes wonderful." And he said this when the kids were not around. I said, "I'm afraid that there'll be a famine. I'm afraid that there'll be a famine and they'll starve because they don't know how to eat things they don't like." He said, "Honey, there's a famine. They'll eat because they're hungry. In the meantime, don't make supper time miserable." And we get caught up so much in the little details. And then men are wonderful fathers and they're terrible mothers. One time when Father George was working from home as a translator and I was working in a preschool, our son had chicken pox and stayed home. And when I left, he was wearing a diaper and a t-shirt, and he was riding his little bike outside, because in Texas you could do this, and we had a safe street. When I came home at 2 o'clock, he was wearing the same diaper and a t-shirt, and he was riding his bike outside. And I said, "What?" He said, "You didn't tell me he needed to be changed." And so, your father will make sure you go to college, your mother will make sure you do your homework, Is there anything else? There's a wonderful book that Father got called On Marriage and Family Life by St. John Chrysostom. And it's got several of his sermons on being married, including a beautiful, beautiful one about the marriage of Isaac and how to choose. It's all about really how to choose a wife and how to treat a wife and how to make your husband happy that he married you. And it's just a beautiful book, and it's out there on the shelf.
It's a compilation of St. John's sermons in Russian. It's just all his sermons are in tomes and tomes of books, but these are pulled out and translated into English. So we have several copies if anyone is interested. Other questions for Matushka, Father John?
Yes.
One question: as you and your husband grew in your marriage, and now your children are older, I'm aware of that. And through the years, were there any suggestions, any tips for how to strengthen a marriage in terms of keeping the couple together a little bit? Because you can get consumed in the children.
You can. They will eat all your attention, and you have to remember. I really miss being able to put them to bed, and then they'll stay there. Some of my friends were complaining that they were hoping their baby would learn how to sleep through the night, and I said, yeah, I hope mine learns someday too. And if the children will not give you time alone, you have to leave them and go someplace so you can be alone, because you've only got them home for the first 20 years. After that, you've still got another 20, 40 years to live, and you want to have a relationship. And so you have to keep up with each other. I know one couple in Connecticut that take a class together every year. And they take, it's not, one year they took math, another year they took carpentry so they could fix something. But it was just the idea of going out together and doing something. Father George and I, we don't have date night, but every night we watch Jeopardy together. I've gotten considerably better at the science answers by hanging out with him. I'm afraid that we used to have one station that played it at 5 and one station that played it at 7, and when I was going through a very insecure period, I would watch both, and then he was impressed that I knew all the answers. But the other thing is flowers. When I was little, my father was going through Harvard Square with me, and he bought me a peach-colored rose. He said, Anne-Marie, I just bought you some flowers. I said, yes, Daddy, I appreciate that. He said, do you know why I bought you flowers? I said, no, Daddy, why? He said, well, I bought you flowers because they're pretty, and you should have something pretty. But I also bought you flowers because I want you to get used to having flowers. He said, for a man to give a woman flowers, he has to have two things. He has to have sensitivity, and he has to have a job. He said, don't marry a man unless he buys you flowers. But the other thing is, when you invest everything in your children, you have to understand they are still independent agents, and they won't do everything you ask them to do. And that came as quite a shock to me. But we've had one child who actually left the faith, and it almost killed us. He became a Muslim. He fell in love with a Muslim girl, and she said, I'm going to this class at the mosque today, and could you come with me because you're so much smarter than me and you understand these things, and could you explain? And he had committed some sins, and he wasn't ready to own up to it at church, and she said, well, keep the Ramadan with us, and that'll make you stronger spiritually. And little by little, and without telling us, they worked very hard at making him conceal this fact from us, and we found out only after he had left, when he left some inappropriate clues on his Facebook page, and his brother told us. And this was during the time when my brother was dying from cancer. It was a lot. When we had the phone call with him, when he did admit to what he had done, Father George was standing next to me. I had it on the speakerphone, and I said, don't die. Please don't die from this. I'm not ready to raise these kids by myself. And he didn't die, and we didn't die. He went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and he spoke to the bishop who hears the nuns' confessions, who's with the Jerusalem Patriarchate. And in a combination of Greek and English, he told him the whole story. And the bishop said, this is a very heavy burden, and you're going to have to carry it a long time. But carrying burdens is how we become strong. And so, you know, when I had a huge temptation during this time, I thought, well, why didn't I just go to work and put them in daycare if this is the way they're going to turn out? But I thought, no, because I have the comfort of knowing we put everything good we had into them, and it's still there. You know, all these years they went to communion, your kids have participated, they have Christ in them, an inextricable part of themselves. And if they stray from that, their own bodies, their own minds, their own souls will tell them that this is a wrong thing. And gradually they will become uncomfortable. And I believe that he'll come back in God's good time. And maybe his wife will come back with him, and she'll be a ferociously strong Christian, because she's very persuasive. But we have to invest everything good that we have in the children. But in order to do that, we have to sustain sustain everything good in our own lives. We have to keep up a prayer life. We have to be kind to each other. We have to treat each other properly, and we have to show them how married people live, because someday they're going to have to be married, and so they need to see you making coffee and bringing flowers and cleaning the snow off the car and things like that. My middle son is about to get married, and I just love this girl. Before she would date him, she made him Skype her father and get his permission to go out with her. Now that's a smart cookie. She had a picture of herself with her daddy on Facebook. I said, yes! She asked her parents' permission before coming to church with us for Pascha. She asked her parents' permission to become Orthodox. And she stands outside the car until he opens the door. She insists on certain things, and he's more than willing to accommodate her because he loves her. And they are good for each other. You know, they say communion prayers together on Sunday mornings. And so, you know, you have to spend time alone with each other while your children are young, so that you still have a brain left when they grow up. Yes?
I think you touched on a really good point. And thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
I think you touched on a really good point about the influence of parents on their children. And it seems that nowadays the parental influence is very diminished. I don't want to be like pessimistic.
Parental time with their kids is diminished.
But like kids, you raise, I'm sorry, like you raise your kids really good, and then they go to high school or college. I can tell you in high school I had a teacher that was, you know, influential in a bad way
Yes,
on a lot of
yes,
students.
yes.
And the teacher has the students every day, you know, for an hour every day. And then they go to college, and there's sometimes open agendas to be anti-Christian, anti-God, anti-religion. And it seems difficult. It seems stressful. I don't have kids, but if I had kids, I feel like it would be stressful.
It's stressful, but we have to consider that the early church grew up in Roman times when you had, you know, the great incentive to leave Christ and work for the Romans. And there was persecution in Greece under the Turks, in Russia under the Mongolian hordes, and also under communism. And we had a secret weapon in that we pray for our children. And the world doesn't see this, and the world doesn't know about this, but it's like a secret intravenous infusion. You know, when my husband was ordained, we were living in Houston, and he would drive through really terrible parts of the town, and he did dangerous things helping people who needed money. And I became a nervous wreck. It didn't help that I was drinking 14 cups of coffee a day because my kids weren't sleeping enough. But a priest friend said, you have to pray to the Mother of God and say, Mother of God, I can't be everywhere. Please be with my husband and protect him. And one of the nicest young women I know is the daughter of a priest. And someone asked her Mantishka how she came up with such a wonderful daughter. She said, it used to be that the daughter said, it used to be that when my mother went on errands for the church, I would cry. I would say, but Mommy, I want you to be with me. And the mother said, but don't you know, whenever I have to leave you, I ask the Mother of God to protect you and to put you under her protecting veil and keep you safe. And she's a much better mommy than I am. And if I'm not home and you have something you need, you ask her. And if you need advice, you ask her. And the result is they have a daughter who pretty much acts like she was raised by the Mother of God. And so we have weapons. The other thing is, your children all have a guardian angel. And you can talk to that angel. When I was having trouble with my family over something, Matushka Irina said, Anushka, pray to their guardian angels. And it's the ultimate way of going over somebody's head. You get to complain about everything, and the other person doesn't know what you said, but they feel disturbed. One time, my son was gone from the house. I had just spoken to our older priest, Father Theodore, about what to do when things are lost. He said, when you've lost something, explain to God why you need to find it. And quietly and prayerfully, and as much as it's possible in a house with 4 children, you should say the Lord's Prayer 3 times with great concentration. And my son had been gone for 4 hours after school, and I knew he was at the home of a friend, and I knew the friend had a dog and a PlayStation, and we didn't. And I knew vaguely where the friend lived on the street, but not exactly which house. And my ill-conceived plan was to get in the car, drive up there, and scream his name up and down the street. But Father Theodore also told me, before you do anything, don't just do things. He said, before you do something, pray about it. Explain to God what you want to do and ask him what to do. He said, and then comes the difficult part. You have to listen, and you have to do what God says. And so I said, I prayed to his guardian angel. I said, could you please tell that boy to get himself home? And then I was going to grab the car key and hop in the car, and I couldn't find the car key. So I did what Father Theodore said. I explained to God why I thought it was important that I find it. And I said the Lord's Prayer once. And I said it twice. And as I was ending it the 3rd time, I heard the front door crack open, and a very sheepish 14-year-old came in the door. And I gave him a list of chores to do, and I drove off to Father Theodore's, where I had a good cry over a cup of tea. But you know, they have guardian angels. And the other thing Latishkiriana told me is, she said, Anushka, just because your children are not home anymore does not mean you can make the sign of the cross over them. So I make the sign of the cross vaguely in the direction of Massachusetts over Xenia, and Virginia over Nicholas, and over James and John, and now over Karen and Khadijah, who would be really thrilled if she knew I do this. And there's also a Saint Khadijah Marie, and I pray to her for my daughter-in-law. She was, she lived in one of the stands. And it was Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, I forget which one. But she was, she came from a Muslim family, and she became Orthodox secretly when she married her husband. And her family suspected, and they came to the house and saw before Pascha the eggs and the breads that she had made for Pascha. And when she came home from church, they tied her to the peach tree and killed her. And she became a martyr. And roses grow from her grave, and the roses heal people who are sick, and people there pray to her all the time for help. So we can't give up.
Other questions? We have a couple minutes left still, and we'll have small groups, but this is an opportunity to address questions to Mach.
How many children have you already?
4. My daughter is 26, and my sons are 25. Reader James is 22, and John is 18 and just started college. And so James is now back at home, otherwise our nest would be empty. It really would be empty, but all the bird stuff is still there. You know? But I'm also the second of 6 children. And so when my brother Danny was born, I was not quite 3. They told me that he was my baby, and he and I have both believed it ever since. And I am doting auntie to their 3 kids, and it's like practice for being a grandmother without actually having to be old first. And then I have siblings who are much younger than we are. Then every 5 years, my stepmom had another baby. So the oldest of them is 10 years younger than Danny, and then 5 years later, so there was Jenny, and 5 years later was Andrew, and 5 years later was Susie, who's the same age as my oldest. They both decided independently of each other to go to the same college. But they decided because they wanted to be friends, they wouldn't room together or take the same classes. But it was good because I already knew a fair amount about diapering and children's games and things like that by the time I had babies. There were still surprises. I remember standing there with a screaming baby at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking of who I could call who would tell me what to do. And I realized there wasn't anybody. I was it. I was the only one who could get this child to stop crying. It was really horrifying. But I got over it and we figured it out.
How old were you when you had your first?
I was 23. And Father George read this wonderful book by Dr. Robert McCall called Infants. And it was the scientific side of babies. And it talked about how if you let a baby cry for 15 minutes, that gets the tension out of their system and they fall asleep. So after church, Xenia would come home smelling like 3 kinds of aftershave and 4 kinds of cologne because everybody had held her. And she'd just be completely wigged out. She'd scream and scream and scream and nothing I could do would make her feel better. And Father George would put her down and tuck her in and take me to the opposite side of the house and put my head on his chest and cover my ears and set the timer for 15 minutes, at the end of which she would wake up. It's a wonderful book. It has an infrared picture of a mother's breast before and after she hears her infant cry. And we really are more sensitive to these things than men. And if you think about it, traditionally men have had to be able to step away and leave the kids, and so they can't afford to be as worried as we are. And we have to be concerned for every single detail. Our noses are more sensitive. We can tell when the children haven't been bathed. And so it's to keep them alive. God built us differently so that we could perform different functions that together make for a sustained lifestyle for a child. Yes?
Would you say one of the biggest crosses to carry is the constant anxiety?
Yes, yes, but there's also the constant sense that the self-doubt that comes with it. Should I have done things differently? Should I be doing things differently? And that's where it helps to have a sane husband who will tell you, you have to stop thinking that. He said one time, even if we have done everything wrong, what are you going to do about it now? It's too late. The main thing is to focus on the things that we can change. And on September 11th of 2001, when the planes hit the towers in New York City, I was supposed to go sing a funeral, and I found out the news, and I didn't make it to the funeral because I was making phone calls trying to track down various people that I knew were in New York, starting with my sister. She worked for Morgan Stanley, but she wasn't in that building, and I was able to make contact with her. But I got to church, and Father Theodore said, so, you needed to contact the Air Force and the Secret Service and secure New York airspace before you could come to the service? I said, Batushka, I had to find Jenny. He said, then you are partially excused. Partially. But listen, he said, I reached a certain point in my life by keeping 2 things very clear. Things over which I have some control and things over which I have absolutely no control whatsoever. He said, things over which I have some control. I have a definite obligation to do everything in my power to make things better. He said, but for me to concern myself over situations over which I have absolutely no control whatsoever, he said, already this borders on sin. And so now when I start to fret over something, I say, how much control do I really have over this?
Other than that, we can pray.
And that's phenomenal control, and we don't understand what a strong weapon we have. You know, just little casual things that we mention in prayer. You know, Father George was reading a passage to me from a book on prayer by Metropolitan Anthony Bloom. And he said, when we forgive some people, it's supposed to be freedom, but really often what we do is we put them on probation instead. And Father George asked me if I had called a certain somebody I had been upset with who was in one of the areas affected by the floods. I said, no. He said, well, don't you think we should? I said, mm-hmm. And number's on my phone if you'd like to call it. And he called, and they had a very pleasant conversation, and I realized that there was somebody I was not reconciled with that I thought I was, and the next day somebody came by on my way to this person's house and brought me it's a stupid thing, but I had wanted a Lance nightgown with the flowers and the hearts on it since I was a freshman at Wellesley, when people would wear them to breakfast with their pearls. And on her way to visit this person, somebody dropped this off, and I thought, okay, I've got to start being nicer to this person. Somebody is praying. Somebody is saying this is a situation that needs to be reconciled. And if you pray for the people with whom you're not reconciled, then gradually God finds a way to smush you together and make you live with each other. You know, if you pray for your children about something, God will fix it without you having to say a word. And the fact that you didn't say a word, oh my goodness, that puts you in such good stead. And they don't know. They don't know the reams and reams of words you've poured out. And with our children, sometimes we don't know what's right. My youngest was born late. Vladimir came to visit us when I was pregnant with John. He came to our parish, and we didn't get bishops very often in Texas. And so it was a very big thing. And there were several things that I considered miraculous. We got the whole house clean except for Nick's room. And I forgot to try fasting margin, and I was just mortified. Vladimir came into our house and started peeling carrots. And, you know, and talking about recipes and things. And he asked me to take him on a tour of the house. I said, Vladimir, I'm so sorry, we got everything clean except Nick's room. He said, Nicholas and I will clean it. I said, I should help you. He said, Matushka, you have to go to the store. So I went to the store, and when I came back, everything was clean. The room was vacuumed. The bed was made in some strange way with the covers draped low, but there wasn't anything on the floor. The whole room was immaculate. I thought, this is the power of the episcopacy. This is grace. Wow. And a few months later, Nicholas said, yes, Vladimir told me to put everything in my closet. I said, what? He said, everything that didn't fit in the closet we put under the bed. And then Vladimir made my bed a special way so you wouldn't know what we did. And he told me to vacuum, and he told me you'd be happy at me. And so now when I say we have to clean house, they say the mommy way or the Vladimir way. But that same visit, I told Vladimir, I said, I don't know why, but I just know that something's going to go wrong with this one. I'd been at the glorification of Blessed Ksenia, and I was really impressed that they brought a baby who had been baptized that day on the glorification of our saint. And we had great dedication to St. John in our family. My dad, before we were Orthodox, came back from a conference in Jordanville, and he said, now kids, there's somebody I want you to pray to. He's not a saint yet, but he's going to be someday, and he really loves children, and I really think he can help you with all of our problems. I said, okay, Daddy, what's his name? He said, I knew I'd forget, so I wrote it down. And he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and he unfolded it. He said, his name is Vladimir John. And so for years and years and years, we prayed, Holy Vladimir John, pray to God for us. And when my brother became a summer kid at Jordanville and told us the proper pronunciation was Vladimir, we thought he was being pedantic or fooling or teasing us or something. But we'd been praying to St. John since before we were Orthodox, and the idea that I was going to have a child born near the day of his glorification was just amazing. I said, Vladimir, something is going to go wrong with this one. I don't know what. But I need to know two things. I need to know if it's okay if we still baptize him for St. John, if we have to baptize him before the day of the glorification. He said, yes, because you're not doing it to do your own glorification, and the church has already announced their intent. Yes, you may. I said, okay, but now I also need you to pray that we don't need to baptize him until after the glorification itself, and that everything goes okay. I said, I will. So John was born 2 weeks late, and he started out a very healthy baby, and then he started throwing up at meals. And then he started projectile vomiting, and after 4 weeks, he would nurse and throw up a quart of milk on my lap and cry because he was hungry. And in the meantime, our insurance had changed from regular insurance to COBRA insurance, and the new doctors were just terrible. You couldn't book an appointment with a pediatrician. You had to show up during the hours when the pediatrician was going to be there, and then sometimes she wouldn't come. So I took him to my doctor. When I had to choose an obstetrician in Texas, I called every doctor on our plan and I said, does this doctor perform abortions? And some of them would say under this circumstance or under that circumstance, or no, but she refers them out. When I called this practice, they said, of course not. I said, when can you book me an appointment? And I really loved my doctor, and he would have you come in for a 3-week checkup afterwards, halfway to the 6 weeks, just to make sure everything was okay. You'd see his nurse. And when I had my James, who's the older of my 2 Texas babies, I thought I was miscarrying the day of the ultrasound, and she took me on a guided tour and showed me the beating heart and that there was no water in the brain, no hole in the spine, and his kidneys were functioning just fine. And I saw that it wasn't just a baby, it was a Lardas child. He had the big cheekbones and big eyes and a tiny chin. I thought, oh wow. So when I went to see Sharon, I brought John and I fed him and he threw up across the room, and she said, pyloric stenosis. She said, don't wait for the pediatrician, take him to the doctors. And whatever doctor is there, the pediatrician will call in the proper tests. And I did. And these doctors, they couldn't find a vein because he was so dehydrated. They had to take the blood, and he was screaming. They slathered him with Band-Aids, like that would comfort him. But when you're 4 weeks old with a Band-Aid, all you do is eat it. You don't know. And so I didn't want to trust the medical advice of people who fed my child Band-Aids. Plus, I hadn't been sleeping a lot, so I wasn't in a rational place. And Father George had served the last panihida for St. John, and he came home and he said, Annie, we have to take him to the hospital. And I said, I would really like to not do that. Is there any way we could take him to the hospital Sunday, baptize him in church, and take him Sunday? And the pediatrician and I agreed that I'd keep a diaper log. And so I kept a diaper log, and Father George went to church, and he served the first Malaban to St. John, and he served Saturday Vigil. And he came to me, and he came home, and he said, Annie, how's the baby? I said, he's fine. He's just fine. He said, where's the diaper log? I said, I didn't need to keep one because he's such a good baby. He didn't wet his diaper. He said, Annie, babies are supposed to wet their diapers. He said, I'm going to baptize him, and we're going to the hospital. I said, oh, but can't we do it at church tomorrow? But wait, I need to get some fish for your dinner, and I need to get batteries for the camera. He said, you go do all that. I said, really? He said, yeah, you go. I'll take care of him. I said, thank you. And I went to the store, and he picked up the phone and called Father Lawrence Gerard, who was an anesthesiologist nurse, whose grandson had pyloric stenosis. And Father Lawrence said, here's how you do a baptism at home. And so when I came home, Father George had a Rubbermaid bin full of water at the ready, and the baby naked. He said the prayers and baptized him and stuck a diaper back on him, and we went to the hospital. And because it was a local regional hospital, I knew I was going to be there all night. So I sent him home because we only had one car. And all kinds of strangers came over to pray for him, and with him, over him. And I said, okay, St. John, it's like this. I don't want to kill my baby. I don't trust these people. So, if it really is pyloric stenosis, if he really does have to have surgery, if I'm right, convince them. If I'm wrong, convince me. And that's when the doctor came in and said, he definitely has pyloric stenosis. You have to take him to the Children's Hospital at Texas in downtown. If you're not there by 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, the police will be sent because this is a life or death matter. I said, Lord, what am I going to do? And I said, my husband took the car home. Can you please call me a cab? And just to find someone to be with the kids, everyone we knew from church was in San Francisco for the glorification, and everybody from home was away for the 4th of July weekend. And so our Baptist neighbor never did recover from the shock of watching the baptism. She said, I knew it was serious when he did that. I said, mm-hmm. So they called me a cab, and the cab driver had a big red bushy beard and bright blue eyes. He could have been a sibling. He could have been Woody Calarian's nephew. He looked like a Jordanville seminarian. And he had very kind eyes, and he said, "What's the matter with the baby? He really looks sick." And I was not convinced that it was pyloric stenosis. I didn't believe it was pyloric stenosis. I was not going to say pyloric stenosis. So I said, "Well, he's projectile vomiting every feeding, and he's getting really dehydrated, and I'm really worried about him." He said, "Oh, pyloric stenosis." I said, "What?" He said, "Did they tell you?" He said, "All they told me was that somebody needed a cab ride home." But I said, "Have you been there? Do you have a child who's had this?" He said, "All our children are girls, and usually this happens to firstborn males. But I've had 2 years of medical school, and if you like, on the way home, I'll tell you all about it." So on the 5-mile ride home, he told me what it was, how they used to treat it. It used to be the doctor would wiggle his finger down the baby's digestive system. What they do now is so much better. He told me what to ask the doctor, what to ask the anesthesiologist. He told me what the scar would look like. By the time we got home, the miracle was that I woke up Father George and I said, "Okay, we have to go to the hospital. It's pyloric stenosis." He said, "Okay." And we got to the hospital, and he dropped me off, and he still had to serve the liturgy, and I'd woken him up. We had a little bed that we slept in at Pascha, and for the kids, it was the best day ever. Oh my goodness. They got to spend the night at the church house. They got to go to the hospital, which had a special playground, and they had a McDonald's in the basement. Life did not get better. As we left, they were planning what they would do the next time John needed surgery. But the doctor, the only place they could draw blood and put in an IV, because he was so dehydrated, was the top of his head. So they put the IV in with a little styrofoam cup over it. He looked like Madonna on her Material Girl tour. I told the nurse that. She said, "Poor baby, first he's sick and then you go making fun of him." You don't understand my family. And he said I couldn't feed him anything more, and he was just furious because he knew I could feed him. He knew. And I was not feeding him, and I was just standing there, and he was just furious, and he hated that IV cord. And the doctor came in, and after liturgy, Father George was there, and all the kids were there, and they just got a new crop of interns, and they had 8 interns in the room. And the doctor gave them a bottle of Pedialyte and listened to it go partway down, and then all of it came up all over the bed in the doctor, and he said, "That's it, we're not doing any more tests. This child has pyloric stenosis, and he has to have surgery right away." And all 8 medical students looked at me, and I said, "Okay, how soon can you book it?" And all 8 students looked at him like this. And he said, "We had been told that you were opposed." I said, "Let me explain it to you." I said, "You have a baby, and he's perfectly healthy, 10 fingers, 10 toes. And he's perfectly healthy except he throws up a little. And then he throws up a little more, and then he's throwing up a lot. But he still looks perfectly healthy, and you have doctors you don't know and you don't trust. And you bring him to perfect strangers who say, 'Your child has a life or death condition. You have to give him to us. We will knock him unconscious, slice him open, sew him back together, and hand him back to you.' I am not thrilled. But if this is the only thing you can do to save my child, then I only have one question, and that is, how soon can you book the surgery?" And after that, everybody relaxed, including Father George, who for a while there was kind of afraid I might run with the baby to Mexico, because I'd certainly been thinking of that. And after that, they couldn't do enough for us. And I said, the doctor said, "Do you have any more questions?" I said, "You will take care of him, won't you?" He said, "I tell you what," he said, "my wife gave birth 4 days ago. I'll take care of him as if he were my own." And they let me hold him until just before they knocked him out for the surgery, and when he woke up, they put me in a wheelchair and put him in my arms and wheeled us both up. And we had a nurse in our parish who worked at the medical center, and Valentina personally chose the surgical team. And when I woke up, holding the baby after I finally got to nurse him, there was a big, huge male Russian nurse sitting in the chair across, waiting for me to wake up. Valentina sent me. I have to check the baby stitches. changed the diaper, he looked at the stitches and said, looks good, should heal fine. I will call Valentina. But what I didn't know was just as I was in the hospital in Texas praying, asking St. John what to do, John's poor godmother, I called Mătușa Elena Pericrostov before we got to the hospital to say, we've baptized the baby, please commemorate the newborn, the newly illumined child John, and please pray for him, and please tell Sonia Drobet, his godmother, that he's been baptized and he needs prayers. Sonia is the youngest of 7, and she heard the news from each of her parents and all of her siblings, one at a time throughout the course of the day. And she went to Vladimir Anthony, who'd been praying for like 3 days straight at this point after writing the service. And Vladimir Anthony and Vladimir Hilarion threw open the relics and had a panihida, had a moleben for him over the relics of St. John. And Vladimir was blessing people in the line, and he paused and he turned to Sonia and he said, the baby is in good hands. He has a powerful saint, and he will be just fine. I said, I wish you told me that. You know? But if we ask God for help with our children, if we say, Lord, I don't know what to do, but you know, then he always sends help. And it might not be the help we expected, but he always sends what we need. And a little tiny child who was wasting away to nothing is now more than 6 feet tall, and every parish he visits, I get reports on quite how much he ate at Trapeza. So